Good evening, 5th graders, moms and dads. If any of you are also watching this video, welcome to Mrs. Sandoval's Math Cyber Corner. Here are the topics for tonight. The first one will be dividing a whole number by a unit fraction. The second topic will be dividing a unit fraction by a whole number. Please remember that if you do not understand the concept taught in this video the first time, you can actually rewind it and watch it as many times as you need to in order to understand the concept. I need this to make sense to you so you can be ready for tomorrow's class discussion. Okay, so like I said, the first topic will be dividing a whole number by a unit fraction. So I have chosen 12. We are going to divide this by 1/3. Okay, so once we are at that point, we need to remember that whenever you start with a whole number, like we have this 12 right here, your answer will also be in the form of a whole number. So the first step is to put the whole number over a 1. So now it has become a fraction. Let's copy our first fraction, which is 12 ones. The next step after that will be to change the division problem to multiplication. We change division to multiplication because we are actually going to be multiplying by an invert fraction. So we invert the second fraction. Here's the second fraction. We use the word invert because that is the math vocabulary word that we use, but really what invert means, it means to flip. So we are actually going to be flipping the second fraction and always and only the second fraction. So instead of having 1/3, now that becomes 3 ones. Our problem is now ready to be solved. So the way that we do this is by just multiplying across. That means that I'm going to multiply 12 times 3. Whatever method it is that you use to figure it out, it's fine, but it's usually a very good idea to know your multiplication facts. 12 times 3 equals 36. And then 1 times 1 equals 1. We call this right here an improper fraction. We call this an improper fraction because the numerator, which is the top number, is greater than the denominator. Now, I want you to remember this tonight. Whenever we have an improper fraction where the number is on top of a 1, the answer is that number. So 36 over 1, the answer is 36. Now, if we connect this to an actual word problem, this would mean we can pretend that the 12 means 12 whole pizzas. And we are asked to divide each whole pizza into thirds, or in other words, into 1/3 pieces. So then the question would become, how many pieces do you have after dividing 12 whole pizzas into thirds? And the answer would be 36. That's our answer, 36 parts or 36 pieces. I'm always asking you to remember to ask yourself if your answer does make sense. That is something that is very important to remember. So that was dividing a whole number by a fraction. Now let's try the second concept for tonight. The second concept or the second topic is to divide a unit fraction by a whole number. In this case, I have chosen 1/5 divided by 6. There we go. So, just like in this problem up here, the first step is to put the whole number over a 1. Now it has become a fraction. Next step, we copy the first fraction. The next step after that is that we change this division sign to multiplication. Next, we invert the second fraction. Remember, we invert the second fraction, always and only the second fraction. So now, instead of being 6 ones, it becomes 1/6. There we go. Now our problem is ready to be solved. Remember that we just multiply across. 1 times 1 equals 1. 5 times 6 equals 30. A reminder that whenever we begin with a fraction, just like we began over here with 1/5, we finish with a fraction. Now, how is this different? And how does our answer make sense? You can pretend we have 1/5 left of a whole cake. 1/5 of a whole cake. Then we take that 1/5 and divide it into 6 parts. Well, then the question would be, one of those parts of cake that we have is what fraction of the entire cake? That means that we would actually, when you think about it, it would mean that all the other 1/5 pieces would also be divided into 6 or be divided by 6. That means that we would have 30 pieces. So one of those pieces would end up being 1/30th. So our answer does make sense. We started with a fraction, we finished with a fraction. The next topic that we will be seeing in the next video will be multiplying a fraction by a whole number and multiplying a whole number by a fraction. One way that I would make this topic for my GT students would be to introduce division of a whole number by a non-unit fraction. This would most likely mean they would end up with an improper fraction that they would have to get rid of by dividing. They would have to realize it would give them a mixed number. Then they would have to remember to check and see if the fraction in the mixed number could be simplified. Another way that I could make this for my GT students would be to introduce dividing a non-unit fraction by another non-unit fraction. That would be for GT students. For my ELLs, I would use cognates, or in other words, words that sound similar in Spanish as they do in English. This would be one way to help them understand the vocabulary. One way that I would try to help my SPED students would be to use an acronym that could possibly help them to remember the steps. So the W would be for whole number over a 1. The C would be for copy the first fraction. The second C would be change multiplication to division. The I would be to invert the second fraction. And the M would be to multiply across. So it would be WCCIM, an acronym that could possibly help them to remember the steps to solve division of a unit fraction by a whole number and a whole number by a unit fraction. And that is it. Thank you for watching.